Thanks for taking the time sitting down. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
You and I have known each other, Gus, I think we were chatting at AdvaMed. It's got to be beyond 20 years now.
Yes, it's been quite a while.
Yeah. And I'm excited to talk about Lungpacer, the new technology you have, the new organization you have. Talk about the tech and also the broader sense. But if you wouldn't mind sharing like the genesis of why you pursued this.
Okay. So a couple years ago, about 12 years ago, when my prior company was in the midst of an exit, my son required mechanical ventilation, and he was 12 years old at the time, so fairly young. And I didn't understand why, but it was a struggle for him to regain the ability to breathe again on his own after he was past his, his acute incident that required the mechanical ventilation. And while he ultimately did what they call wean from mechanical ventilation and regain his ability to breathe, he tragically passed away several weeks later. So after my company exited, I was looking for a way to honor his life and to try to find something that would perhaps make things better for patients like my son Cameron in the future. And I spent my whole career creating new technologies, and so I started looking and talking, and I came across, with some help from some friends, technology, at least a patent that had been filed to Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, and I met with the inventor of that technology, and he had unfortunately experienced a very similar situation with his mom, which led him to file that patent. So together we then raised the initial seed round of $5 million to work towards driving this technology to the market.
So where is Lungpacer now? And tell me about the problem we're solving as detailed as we want to go to in this venue.
Absolutely. So the goal that we're trying to achieve here is to help patients regain independent breathing faster. And what I didn't know at the time when my son got sick was that the diaphragm muscle is a special type of muscle, much like our heart. It's working all the time, so it's constantly contracting. And when rested for just a short period of time, it remodels very quickly. And about the time that this patent was filed up at the university, there's a paper that came out from University of Pennsylvania that cited that this muscle, the diaphragm muscle, can lose up to 50% of its muscle mass within about a day or two. So extraordinary remodeling of this muscle. So what we have are patients who require mechanical ventilation to save their lives, but the longer that they're on it, that necessary breathing muscle loses its strength and mass quite quickly. And then when they're past the need of that, they don't have the muscle they need to take the breath. So if this was our arm muscles or our leg muscles, you would go through physical therapy and gradually rebuild the strength you need to stand up, to walk, to do daily living. But for this muscle, it's sort of all or nothing. If you want to get off of the ventilator, that muscle needs to take responsibility for every breath. So our goal was to create a way to exercise that muscle while these patients are ventilated and perhaps sedated. And when these patients are sedated, the brain isn't telling the muscle to work. So we wanted to find a way to short circuit that control center and stimulate the muscle to continue to be strong while those patients are unable to breathe on their own.
Wow. So I know you've described the technology to me before, but I wasn't aware of that diaphragm muscle, the characteristic of it atrophying that rapidly.
Yes. So these patients, by the time they get to 4 days, they've lost significant amount of muscle strength. And in fact, the data shows that within the first hour of mechanical ventilation, the mitochondria, which are the power centers in all of our muscles, actually start to deteriorate. So it happens that quickly, and then it's measurable in the muscle strength and muscle mass on the order of half a day to a day, and then it continues to weaken over time. We started out with technology. We wanted it to be something that could be easily placed into patients while they were in the hospital. And we wanted it to be removable as soon as it was no longer necessary. And at that time, there were implantable devices that could be placed in patients. Christopher Reeve was an actor who a lot of people know about, who had an unfortunate horseback riding accident, spinal cord injury, and he had a pacemaker placed to allow his diaphragm to continue to contract even though his brain was no longer connected to that breathing muscle. And so extraordinary technology, which is still used today to help a lot of patients. But these patients in the ICU aren't often in a healthy enough position to have a surgical procedure to place such a device. So we wanted something that could be inserted in the traditional clinical care pathway and removed as soon as it was no longer necessary.
So tell me about the device and how it makes its way into the patient, especially in the ICU setting.
So we settled on using a catheter-based platform, and we knew that the nerves that control the diaphragm muscle are very close to certain veins in the body. And we know that there are central line catheters placed in almost every critical care patient. So we built the technology around a central line catheter idea where it would look and feel like a central line. It would come in a kit that's very similar and be placed in the same way. And if indeed you do place the Lungpacer catheter from the left side of the body and extend it over to the right side of the body down in the superior vena cava, it crosses really close to the left and the right phrenic nerve. So from the vein in these patients, we're able to send signals that capture those two nerves and allows us to contract the muscle so we can basically take over what the brain is unable to do for these patients.
Wow. Wow. And I know in our last conversation, you and I were chatting about this platform technology has legs and other potential indications.
Yes, so that's correct, Joe. So when we started to explore the other benefits for this technology, it really all began with trying to build a stronger muscle. What we learned is that when patients are ventilated and their diaphragm is not moving, that diaphragm is tented up and collapses essentially part of the lungs, a condition called atelectasis. So when a patient's on a ventilator, the ventilator has to make up for that lack of volume somehow, and so it often has to overpressurize the lungs, and it stretches the upper part of the lungs and causes a condition called volutrauma or barotrauma. So when you're not moving your diaphragm and you need external respiratory support, you also then get lung injury. And what's interesting is that the lungs communicate with the brain. So what you have when you're on ventilation is a lung area that's getting too much air, and that sends a signal to the brain that I'm being overstretched. And you have a portion of the lung that says, I'm not getting enough air, and that sends a signal to the brain that says, I'm getting nothing here. And there's a part in the middle that's pretty happy, so it's sort of like a Goldilocks paradox. And what happens is the brain gets an aberrant signal of confusing information, and it's looking for that feedback of, this diaphragm's working, is it filling the lungs appropriately? So that signal leads to inflammation in the brain, which causes brain cell death in the hippocampus, and that creates neuroinflammation in the rest of the body. So a non-moving diaphragm leads to two types of lung injury, which leads to neuroinflammation in the brain. And as we've started to discover this, we've found that using the Lungpacer therapy can mitigate many of those problems in these patients.
So there's not a technology like this right now in the marketplace that's catheter-based that addresses this mechanism of action for this type of injury.
That is correct. Today, the standard of care for getting a patient off of a ventilator is to each day run a spontaneous breathing test where they remove the ventilator support from the patient. It's quite uncomfortable for the patients. They describe it as they feel like they're drowning for a period of time. The criteria for stopping that test daily is their blood pressure too high? Does their oxygenation or their CO2 levels go out of bounds, or they have too much anxiety? The patients don't look forward to it, but it's the only way that we have to try to force them to work that muscle. And so today that is our standard of care. There are no other therapies that are there in the market for these patients.
Well, what's the regulatory pathway for this from the FDA perspective?
So the pathway for the Lungpacer AeroPace device, which will be our first product, is a PMA. So we've run a series of 3 trials, 2 of them which were RCT studies. The last one finished a little over a year ago, and we are in the final stretches of approval with the Food and Drug Administration. Because of this unique problem with no other solutions, FDA granted us a breakthrough device designation for the device.
Excellent.
Yes.
So where do we sit right now in our sort of journey towards a commercial product?
So what we expect to happen is we'll have approval in Q1 of next year with the ability to launch the product towards the end of the year. We've applied for a new technology add-on payment because the device is a breakthrough, which we think will help adoption. We have clinical data that shows that we can dramatically shorten the time on mechanical ventilation, which is a health economic benefit. We can reduce the number of patients that have to get reintubation. Reintubation costs dollars as well as increases the risk of mortality for patients. And we can dramatically reduce the number of patients on the ventilator at the end of 30 days, which should lower healthcare costs as well. Fewer patients that will have to go to long-term acute care in the hospital. So we expect to launch that product towards the end of next year. But in parallel, we'll be pursuing these other indications to look at using the technology to mitigate brain injury and lung injury. And our phase 2 study will begin in the beginning of next year with help from the US government through BARDA funding.
Wow. Wow, exciting time for you, my friend.
Very much so, yes, yes.
And your hands are filled.
They are.
Right.
Yes.
And so you're a TCT now. When somebody thinks about this technology, it might not feel like it is a bullseye within a TCT environment. What's got you, beside being a great learner and a lifelong student, what's got you here at TCT on behalf of Lungpacer?
So in a study for our device, we're looking to improve lung and brain health. We also noticed that our patients were able to experience about a 20% improvement in cardiac output. So what we didn't know at the time was that patients who are getting external respiratory support or they have weak breathing, that actually puts a burden on the heart to circulate blood. And by activating the diaphragm muscle, reducing some of the pressure that's on the inside of the lungs, because as the diaphragm works, the ventilator is needed less, that the heart is able to be much more efficient in pumping blood. So we believe this is absolutely a new application for our technology in the area of heart failure.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. Talk about a baseline technology and multiple opportunities across domains.
Yes.
That's exciting.
Very exciting for us, yes.
Oh, good. Well, Doug, as usual, I always appreciate our conversations.
As do I.
Yeah, and continued success with Lungpacer and beyond.
I thank you very much. Great speaking with you today.
Always. I'm Joe Mullings from TCT 2024. Be well.